Today's the 17th of February 2024. The Nets are in a state of rabble. The team is 12 games under 500. They want to be competitive. They've just come off a 50-point loss to Boston going into the All-Star break. And it's fair to say, it doesn't look like there's any change arising in the foreseeable future. It is a worrying sign to me when I did a podcast episode about a month ago, and the notes I used in that episode are the notes I'm using to talk about this team today. Nothing has changed. Now, this video is merely therapy for me. It is also therapy for you. Don't see this as a one-way conversation. This is a conversation for you as well to chat shit about this team. What are your thoughts? What's your stance? This is an open conversation. So in the comments section below, share your thoughts about this team, where they're at, what you think they need to do to improve. You don't have to agree with me. I'm more than welcome to hear your opinion. I'm not going to slate you for it. But what I do ask is you respect everyone else's opinions as well, because everyone's ultimately got a different stance. Anyway, I'm going to dive into exactly what I'm thinking about this team at the moment, at this given time. This team, this franchise, I guess you could say, is rotten to the core, it seems. And look, I think you can acknowledge Sean Marks's good past and at the same time be able to acknowledge the ultimate fumble he has accomplished in the last couple of years. Everything has turned to shit. Josiah is the guy responsible for Sean Marks, and Sean Marks is responsible for JV. Now, all of these people need to be removed so you can just start fresh. I am of the belief that it is not a player issue. I think once you improve what's going on up top and you get a fresh culture that players can buy into, I think that's when you will see the product completely change. Now, there's two things for me that gets this team back on track. And it's really summing up why we're in the position we're in and why we've been so inactive as we've been. The first thing is acceptance, and the second thing is accountability. Now, acceptance is incredibly important because in order for us to move forward as a franchise, we need to accept the position we're in. We need to accept that young players need to get more run. We need to accept the circumstances. We need to accept that the coach is simply not good enough. And we need to accept that what is in the past is in the past. And we need to let go from that, I think. I think right now we are holding on to something that simply isn't there. We're trying to manifest something that simply isn't there. It's like we're trying to similarly form Mikal Bridges into this player that he simply isn't, as has been the case with a number of other players on the roster. Cam Johnson is not a 4. Cam Thomas is not a bench player. Ben Simmons is not the focal point of the offense, or you can't rely on him to do that. Now, look, JV is within his right to have Ben Simmons as a part of the plan A. Sure, that's fine with me. But you also had to accept that he is not reliable enough for you to structure your entire offense around, to the point where you need to have plan B, plan C, plan D in place. It doesn't seem like we have any plan outside of the Ben Simmons offense. And if Ben Simmons is going to be out for some time, and who's to say that he won't be out another 15 to 20 games this season, then what's the plan B? Because right now it doesn't seem like there is a plan B. The other thing is accountability. And the accountability needs to start from the top, work its way down. And this is interlinked with the idea of acceptance. You need to hold your coach accountable. You need to hold your staff accountable. You need to hold your players accountable. At halftime, when we were down 36 points to Boston, you would have thought that 15 to 20 minutes was used productively. With a good team, with a good coach, with a good coaching staff in place. Now, I have no reason to believe that there was anything other than apathetic words being said in the locker room at halftime, because as soon as the third quarter started in that Boston game, we conceded 3 threes in 90 seconds. And Please tell me how there was any rev up in the dressing room to result in something like that. There wasn't any rev up. And it probably shows the players have checked out. It probably shows that JV simply isn't capable. At least if he showed a little bit of grit, then the players could sort of buy into that. Your coach needs to lead from the front. Your coach needs to instill the mindset. It's not all good and well. And JV keeps saying that he thinks it's going to get better, but when he keeps on consistently saying that this team is trying to work things out, when that has been the case for the best part of 80 games since the trades happened last year, well, it's complete nonsense. I mean, no one can believe that. And look, I think it really, everything has culminated into the way the fans feel about the team. You know, the fans feel the exact same way. They don't believe. They believe it's all nonsense. And rightfully so, because we've been sold something that simply doesn't exist. And ultimately, fans don't actually know what to do after a game. Because you see people in Twitter spaces getting really irate that we've lost. But then also we're saying this team needs to clean house. The fact that we're sitting in this middle ground, this purgatory, is doing nothing but holding this team back. And the fact that we made minimal moves at the deadline has delayed that process 6 months further down the line. You know, because we swapped Dinwiddie for Schroeder. He is a good player. He is a better player. He's going to make the team better simply because Spencer was throwing games ultimately. But he isn't a needle mover. He isn't one of those defining sort of pieces that indicate which way you're going. It's just more of the same. We got him from a team that has sort of the same kind of future thinking mindset. Toronto, I'm pretty sure, don't really know what they're doing, but they do have some very nice pieces for the future. They made those moves. We don't have that luxury. We got rid of O'Neal. We got rid of 2 expirings at the end of the day, but we still have Finney-Smith. Bridges is still like the second in command or the one. These players are not being positioned in the right spot to win. Like, JV is not helping that cause one bit, and that sort of draws back into the acceptance kind of thing. You have to accept the roles that these guys can play and stop trying to cookie cut them into a certain mold that they are simply not. I think that's the real reason we're 12 games under 500 now. And JV is not going to optimize the process further. I think these players are really capable. I have faith in this team. And look, I'm not Jacques Vaughn, so I can say that. But JV is driving these players into the ground, essentially. He is the pilot of a plane that is destined to crash. What I do know is, going back to the acceptance again, if you don't change anything, these flaws will remain and show face. It's really that simple. There's some things which definitely can be player handled, like the effort. I don't think, irrespective of the coach, you've got to show the willingness to win. And to wear the Brooklyn jersey is buying into the culture, the so-called culture that is Brooklyn grit. Now, the fact that these players don't seem to be carrying that sort of mantra probably indicates there needs to be a change in hierarchy, because, you know, if you're trying to sell an identity and these players aren't actually feeding into it, well, then you're never going to go far, no matter what players you have. We can talk about what players we can get in the off season. We can talk about players that we could have gotten in the short term. Nothing is going to change if you have the same people leading the way. These people are leading you to a dead end. Going forward, you need to recognize the experiences you've had in order to get better. You need to recognize what you're doing wrong. You need to recognize that there are certain players holding the team back, and you've got to hold them to account. It's really that simple. And I think the really key thing for me is getting that grit back. I think everything falls into place if you get the grit back. Right now, this team's devoid of confidence. And it really showed with that podcast between Mikal, Josh Hart, and Jalen Brunson. Look, we're consistently saying that Mikal is not a leader on this team, but then everyone's getting upset that he isn't being that leadership presence. So which one is it? That's sort of my take on that. But look, I don't think he is within his right to talk back to Brunson and Hart if they're talking shit. This team lost by 50 points. I'm pretty sure he's well aware of the dire situation we're in. He's devoid of confidence, much like many others. The performance against Boston was indefensible, and to go on a podcast a couple of days later probably wasn't the smartest move in hindsight. But you can't really talk about the Nets in a positive light. Before you talk about the team externally, I think it needs to all be resolved internally. Even though some people believe what Mikel said was probably a rash sort of decision, I think if he said something else, you may have said the same thing. And we'll never know because he didn't say it. So, look, I think the way Mikel acted on that podcast was probably an indictment of how mentally exhausted he is. He's had a whirlwind sort of situation for a year. Got traded away from Phoenix. That was a good team, a good vibes sort of team. Went to the Nets, did well for half a season. This season, it's been more tumultuous. I think that'll make him a better player, but I don't think that we've necessarily put him in a good position. Like, as I've said with many other players, I think Claxton is not being optimized either. And I also think that he's getting deterred from the jump shots. I think he's definitely got that skill. He just is less inclined to take it. Whether that's because JV wants the team to take less mid-ranges, I'm not sure. But it's pretty clear that, you know, there's just a lack of inspiration on offense. The defense, no idea. Schematically, like, sometimes the switching, the help defense is ridiculous. Like, we're helping one pass away and leaving players open one pass away. There are no adjustments. There are only excuses. And that's where it all comes back to accountability. Accountability comes in many forms. You can hold others accountable, but you've also got to hold yourself accountable. I don't think JV's done that enough this year, if at all. And when you've got a coach who cannot recognize his own mistakes and recognize that he needs to improve and he needs to change things up instead of finding excuses when it comes to rotations, with the amount of practices we have, with the amount of time between games, I mean, that just sets the precedent again, sets the tone. We need to get back to being a more ruthless team, whether that is getting players from Europe in the offseason or getting some gritty veterans. That's going to be the way forward, partially. There's a lot of things that could be fixed. You've got to have a coach that fits the bill in that sense, but you've also got to have a few leading figures. It doesn't feel like there's that one sole figure leading this team in terms of setting the tone, in terms of intensity. You know, you've just got to have someone who has a little bit of fire about him. Just a little bit. I thought I was going to be seeing that with the amount of defensively minded players we have this year, but instead it's gone the complete other way, and they've turned into, well, in some cases, shadows of their former selves. And is that an indictment of Jacques Vaughn and the defensive scheme he's instilling? I don't know. I would say that potentially it definitely is the case. Look, I will go as far to say that we are the laughing stock of the league. Tough conversations need to be had. You need to accept, you need to hold players, coaching staff, higher-ups, all to account. And they've got to take accountability themselves. And we've got to really swing the tide of this team. Now, we've got the second easiest run going forward for the rest of the season. Now, we could end up getting 35 to 40 wins and make the play-in. But that doesn't change anything if the common ground, which is all the flaws that we have in place, if they are still there at the end of the season, this issue is going to prolong itself far beyond where we could imagine. If you as a GM, if you as an owner don't own up to where we currently are now, and you don't pick a direction, that is an incredibly stubborn, selfish, vile way to run a franchise. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of fans here that support this team, and a lot of fans don't know how to react. As I said, we don't know how to react post-game because we don't know if winning's a good or a bad thing. We don't know if losing's a good or a bad thing. We know now that the veterans aren't contributing to winning basketball. We've seen what happens with teams like Memphis, who have thrown in the towel this season. A lot of players injured and out. They have just thrown in their youth. And it's probably been out of necessity, but you were seeing the results. They have one less win than us, and they have had far more absence due to injury than we have. Far more absence. The Grizzlies beat the Bucks yesterday. They know that this season is done. The fan base knows that. The fan base knows the youth movement is going to bring them forward this season at least, and then they can get their players back and go at it next season. But now they've got a nice young foundation there to go with because they're getting all this exposure now. We don't have that luxury. We don't have our picks. We're 12 games under 500, and we're going to go into the off-season not knowing which way this franchise is going. Unless there is change. Otherwise, for the next 2-3 months, we're going to die wondering. Ultimately, this team has forgotten how to win. In an all-access meeting, probably just before the losing streak began, we were 13-10 at the time. It was about December the 11th. Now, that is about 2 months ago, a little bit over. JV in the all-access YouTube channel published, video content sort of thing, he said 3 things that really stuck out to me. Truth and transparency, tougher, and hold your nerve. That was 3 words he put on a whiteboard and told his players to adopt. That mindset, that attitude. I have not seen since that all-access video, Inner Sanctum stuff, I've not seen those really raised to the forefront at all in our play. Truth and transparency, I don't think there's been any transparency. I don't think there's really the truth being confronted well enough. And that's why we're in purgatory right now. The toughness is lacking. There are so many loose balls we could dive for. There are so many rebounds we could collect. There are so many times we could contest shots better. All of those things fall short. Hold your nerve. Man, what nerve? That's going to be it from me. I could honestly talk about this team forever. You know, there is so much wrong with this team. It is crazy to think just over a year ago with KD and Kyrie, we had won 18 games in a month. And it was fair to say this team was sky high in terms of confidence. Now, I am saying that if you start winning games again, then all of a sudden the mindset will shift. You will see it in terms of the discourse around this team. But don't let it fool you. This team will not change until you face the facts. And that's really all I have to say, if I had to say it in short form. Make sure to put your thoughts about this team in the comments below. You can make it as short or as long as you like. This is a therapy session ultimately. I will be responding to every single comment with the hope of having a nice rational conversation. What I say may not necessarily be right in your eyes. That is just, it just comes down to it being my opinion and you having a different one. That's okay. That's okay. I will continue to emphasize that is okay if you say something and someone else disagrees. So make sure to be open. Don't be afraid to share your thoughts because, man, if there's one thing I take away from tough experiences that I've had in past situations when it comes to certain teams, because believe it or not, I've seen worse in fan bases and organizations. It is so important for the fan base to stick together. So that's what I push and preach. Hope you enjoyed this one. And hopefully we can be witness to not just some better basketball in the back end of the year that has a little bit of ruthlessness about it, but we also have a little bit more clarity come the end of the season with regards to which direction this team wants to take. See you guys. Bye for now.